The first scream came from the east wing. A nurse dropped a medication tray. Metal rattled across the floor. Patients looked up. Visitors froze. Then a man burst through the double doors holding a handgun. Blood stained one sleeve of his jacket. His breathing was ragged. His eyes moved constantly, searching. Behind him, distant voices echoed through the corridor. Security was already running. Someone shouted for lockdown. Someone else yelled for everyone to get down. In the middle of the chaos stood Emily Carter, 24 years old. 3 weeks into her trainee nursing program. Quiet, polite, almost invisible. The senior nurses barely trusted her with difficult cases. The doctors rarely remembered her name. When the armed fugitive rushed toward the surgical ward, everyone expected Emily to panic. Instead, she watched, measured, calculated, and before the night was over, the entire hospital would realize they had been completely wrong about the trainee nurse standing quietly among them. The evening shift at St. Gabriel Medical Center began the same way most weekday shifts began. Busy, predictable, a little understaffed. Nurses moved through crowded hallways carrying charts and medication trays. Monitors beeped behind half-open doors. Families waited beside patient beds, hoping for updates. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. At the center of it all was Emily Carter. She wore the same light blue trainee badge as every new nurse in the program. Most people never looked twice at her. Emily, room 214, needs another blood pressure check. Senior nurse Rachel Morgan handed over a chart without looking up. "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied. Rachel nodded and moved on. Emily headed down the corridor. She checked on Mr. Walter Simmons, a 72-year-old cardiac patient recovering from surgery. His blood pressure was slightly elevated. Before recording the numbers, Emily spent a few extra seconds studying his breathing pattern. Something felt different. Not dangerous. Just different. She adjusted his pillow position slightly. Within minutes, his breathing relaxed. Mr. Simmons smiled. "You're the only one who noticed I was uncomfortable." Emily returned the smile. Sometimes the small things matter. Across the hall, Dr. Daniel Hayes overheard the exchange. The emergency physician was respected throughout the hospital for his skill and efficiency. He also had little patience for trainees. When Emily entered the nurses' station a few minutes later, he glanced at her chart notes. "You spend too much time observing." Emily remained calm. "Observation helps." "It helps after you have experience," Daniel replied. "Right now, focus on procedures." Several staff members nearby nodded. Emily simply accepted the criticism. "Understood, doctor." The conversation ended there. Most people would have defended themselves. Emily never did. That was one of the reasons people underestimated her. They mistook silence for uncertainty. As the evening continued, patients arrived steadily through the emergency department. A construction worker with a broken wrist. An elderly woman suffering dehydration. A teenager with a sports injury. Emily moved from room to room, handling routine tasks without complaint. Yet there was something unusual about the way she worked. She noticed details others missed. A loose wheel on a transport chair. A malfunctioning door latch near a storage room. A visitor lingering too long near a restricted hallway. None of those things seemed important. Still, Emily noticed them. And remembered them. At 7 o'clock, Rachel assigned her to assist with supplies in the surgical ward. "Just inventory work tonight," Rachel said. Emily nodded. Inventory work was usually given to trainees because it was considered simple. While counting supplies, Emily paused near a window overlooking the parking structure. Her eyes scanned the area below. Cars entering. Cars leaving. Security patrol route. Ambulance access lane. A normal person might have glanced outside for a second. Emily studied everything for nearly 10. Then she returned to work. No one noticed. Later, during a short break, several nurses gathered in the staff lounge. The conversation turned toward career goals. One nurse hoped to become a supervisor. Another wanted to enter hospital administration. Rachel looked toward Emily. "What about you?" Emily took a sip of coffee. I want to help patients." A few people laughed softly. "That's everyone's answer," one nurse said. Emily smiled politely. Maybe it was. But for her, it was also true. The conversation moved on. Near the end of the shift briefing, Security Chief Marcus Reed entered the room. Marcus was a former police officer responsible for hospital security operations. He exchanged routine information with staff regarding visitor procedures and emergency protocols. Most people listened casually. Emily listened carefully. Every word, every detail. Marcus noticed. Only for a moment. Then he continued speaking. When the meeting ended, he watched Emily leave. Something about her attention stood out. Not enough to mean anything. Just enough to remember. By 9 o'clock, darkness had settled outside. Rain tapped softly against the hospital windows. The corridors grew quieter. Patients slept. Families headed home. Staff prepared for a long night. Emily finished updating charts and began another round through the ward. As she walked, she passed a wall-mounted television near the waiting area. A local news broadcast flashed briefly across the screen. Police activity had increased somewhere across the city. The report lasted only seconds. Most people ignored it. Emily did not. She slowed slightly, watched, then continued walking. A few minutes later, she stopped beside a patient room and looked down the corridor. Nothing seemed wrong. Everything appeared normal. Yet a strange feeling settled in her mind. The kind of feeling that came when small details refused to fit together. The hospital remained calm. The night remained quiet. But somewhere beyond the walls of St. Gabriel Medical Center, events were already unfolding that would soon reach them. And when they did, the people who barely remembered Emily Carter's name would discover there was far more behind the trainee badge than anyone had ever imagined. The hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm. Monitors beeped steadily. Ventilators hummed softly. The bright energy of the daytime shift had faded into something quieter and more controlled. For most of the staff, it felt like any other evening. For Emily Carter, it did not. Just after 9:30, she was restocking supplies near the emergency department when she heard two paramedics speaking near an ambulance bay. Their conversation was brief. Low voices. A few hurried words. Most people would not have paid attention. Emily did. Still searching. State police involved. Armed. The words disappeared as the paramedics walked away. Emily returned to her work. But she remembered every one of them. Inside the emergency department, Dr. Daniel Hayes reviewed patient charts while nurses moved between treatment rooms. The atmosphere remained calm. At least on the surface. A short time later, Security Chief Marcus Reed received a radio transmission. His expression changed slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice. Enough for Emily. Marcus stepped into a nearby office and closed the door. Emily happened to be passing the hallway when she saw him through the office window. He was listening more than talking. That usually meant new information was coming in. When Marcus emerged several minutes later, he immediately contacted two security officers. He assigned them to entrances that normally required only one guard. Again, nobody seemed concerned. Nobody except Emily. She continued moving through her duties without drawing attention to herself. Around 10 o'clock, she checked on Mr. Walter Simmons. The elderly patient was awake. Unable to sleep. "Something bothering you?" Emily asked. "The hospital feels different tonight." Emily adjusted his blanket. "Different how?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Just feels tense." Emily glanced toward the hallway. Maybe he felt it too. Maybe people noticed more than they realized. "Try to get some rest," she said gently. "I'll check on you again soon." As she left the room, she noticed Rachel Morgan approaching. The senior nurse looked tired. "Everything all right?" Rachel asked. "Yes." Rachel studied her for a moment. "You always look calm." Emily smiled faintly. "I try to be. Either you're naturally calm, or nothing ever surprises you." Emily didn't answer. Rachel laughed softly. "See? That's exactly what I mean." They continued down the corridor together. At the nurse's station, A television broadcast interrupted regular programming. The screen displayed breaking news. Police vehicles. Flashing lights. A road closure several miles away. The report was brief and incomplete. Authorities had not released many details. Still, one phrase stood out. An armed fugitive remained at large. Several nurses watched for a moment before returning to work. Hospitals received patients connected to crimes all the time. Nobody considered it unusual. Emily watched a few seconds longer. Then the report ended. An hour passed. Rain intensified outside. The parking lot grew nearly empty. Inside the hospital, Marcus Reed received another call. This one lasted longer. When he hung up, he immediately contacted local law enforcement. Emily noticed. Again. Not because she was trying to listen. Because she noticed patterns. And Marcus Reed was behaving differently. At 10:45, she entered a storage room to retrieve supplies. When she emerged, she saw Marcus walking quickly through the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. "Everything okay?" Emily asked. Marcus hesitated. Probably. Not definitely." Emily filed that away. "Anything staff should know?" "Not yet." His answer was professional. Careful. Controlled. But it confirmed what she already suspected. Something was happening. Marcus continued down the corridor. Emily watched him disappear around the corner. Then she resumed her work. Near 11 o'clock, the emergency department received a routine notification about possible incoming trauma patients. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Yet Emily found herself mentally reviewing the hospital layout. Emergency exits. Security stations. Treatment areas. Access corridors. It happened automatically. A habit she never discussed. A habit she had carried for years. Across the ward, Rachel noticed Emily standing quietly near a floor map. "What are you doing?" Emily looked up. "Just making sure I know the quickest routes between departments." Rachel laughed. "You really are the most prepared trainee I've ever met." Emily smiled. Maybe. Or maybe she simply disliked surprises. Minutes later, Marcus Reed gathered 2 security officers near the main entrance. The conversation was serious. One officer nodded and immediately moved toward the parking structure. The other headed toward a side entrance. Emily watched from a distance. The feeling in her stomach grew stronger. Not fear. Awareness. The kind that appeared when pieces of a puzzle slowly began fitting together. Then came another update from local news. The armed fugitive had still not been located. Authorities believed he was injured. Police continued searching nearby neighborhoods. The report ended after less than 30 seconds. Most people barely paid attention. Emily did. An injured fugitive. Nearby. Still moving. Still desperate. The combination worried her. Desperate people made dangerous decisions. Especially when they ran out of options. Outside, rain continued falling against the darkened city. Inside, patients slept peacefully. Families sat beside loved ones. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Everything looked normal. But beneath that calm surface, pressure was building. The staff of St. Gabriel Medical Center did not know it yet. The man police had been searching for was getting closer. And before the night ended, every assumption they had made about Emily Carter would be tested under circumstances none of them could have imagined. At 11:17 p.m., Victor Kane reached the hospital. He had been running for hours. Rain soaked his clothes. A deep wound cut across his left side. Every step looked painful. From a distance, he appeared to be just another injured man searching for medical help. That was exactly what made him dangerous. The service entrance on the south side of St. Gabriel Medical Center was used mainly for deliveries and maintenance crews. Normally, it remained secure. But during a shift change, one of the doors had been opened briefly for a supply contractor. By the time security noticed, Victor Kane was already inside. A maintenance worker saw him first. The employee immediately noticed blood on Kane's jacket. "You need help." Kane lowered his head and nodded weakly. "Been in an accident." The worker pointed toward the emergency department. "Go straight through that corridor." "Thank you." Kane continued walking. Slowly, carefully, watching everything. He wasn't looking for treatment. He was looking for cover. Meanwhile, Emily Carter was completing patient checks in the surgical ward. The hospital remained quiet. Most rooms were dark. Patients rested. Nurses completed paperwork. Everything seemed normal. Until Emily noticed a man walking through a restricted corridor. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. But then she saw several details. His shoes were covered in wet mud. His breathing was controlled despite an obvious injury. His eyes never stopped moving. And he never looked at the signs directing patients toward registration. Instead, he studied exits, security cameras, staff positions. Emily slowed her pace. Something immediately felt wrong. Victor Kane continued toward the emergency department. A nurse near reception approached him. "Sir, are you injured? Just need a doctor." His voice sounded strained, but not weak, not frightened. Controlled. Too controlled. The nurse reached for a wheelchair. That was when Kane's hand briefly moved beneath his jacket. Only for a second. Emily saw it from across the hallway. The outline of a handgun. Small. Concealed. Real. Her pulse increased. Not from panic. From certainty. She immediately turned toward the nearest phone station. Without creating alarm, she contacted security. Possible threat in emergency reception. The operator hesitated. Threat. Male. Injured. Concealed weapon. The line went silent. Then, security responding. Emily hung up. She did not run. She did not shout. Doing either could trigger a reaction before security arrived. Instead, she moved closer. Watching. Waiting. A minute later, Security Chief Marcus Reed appeared with 2 officers. They approached carefully. Marcus positioned himself several feet away. "Sir, I'd like to speak with you." Victor Kane looked at him. Everything changed. In that moment, Kane understood he had been recognized. His eyes hardened. The injured man vanished. The fugitive appeared. The handgun emerged from beneath his jacket. Several people screamed. Patients ducked. A chair crashed onto the floor. Security officers reached for their weapons but stopped when Kane aimed directly at a nearby nurse. Nobody moved. Silence filled the corridor. Pure silence. The kind created by sudden fear. Marcus slowly raised his hands. "Take it easy. I'm not going back." Kane backed toward the surgical ward. His breathing accelerated. Blood continued seeping through his clothing. The injury was getting worse. That made him even more dangerous. People trapped by pain and fear often became unpredictable. Emily stood among a group of nurses several yards away. Kane barely noticed her. To him she looked like everyone else. Young. Inexperienced. Harmless. Exactly what she wanted him to believe. "Clear the hallway," Kane ordered. Marcus nodded. Everyone moved slowly. Staff began retreating. Patients were hurried into rooms. Doors closed. Lights flickered as emergency protocols activated. The hospital's partial lockdown procedure began. Not a full lockdown. Not yet. But enough to isolate sections of the building. Kane forced several people toward the surgical ward. A doctor. 2 nurses. 3 patients unable to move quickly. And unfortunately, Emily Carter. Rachel Morgan noticed. Emily. But it was too late. Kane pointed the gun. "Move." Emily obeyed. Calmly. Without resistance. Without fear showing on her face. The group entered the ward. Behind them, security doors sealed automatically. Marcus Reed watched from the opposite side. The situation had just transformed into a hostage crisis. Police units were already being dispatched. But they were minutes away. Inside the ward, Kane forced everyone into a central treatment area. The atmosphere changed instantly. Fear spread through the room. One patient began crying. Another struggled to breathe. A nurse quietly prayed under her breath. Emily observed everything. Distances, doors, equipment, people, threats, opportunities. Not because she expected a fight. Because understanding the environment was the first step toward protecting everyone inside it. Kane paced across the room. The gun never left his hand. His injury was worsening. His movements were becoming less stable. And every passing minute increased the danger. Outside the ward, police vehicles were already approaching the hospital. Inside, dozens of innocent lives now depended on a desperate balance. No one knew how the night would end. No one knew whether help would arrive in time. And no one, not Marcus Reed, not Rachel Morgan, not Dr. Daniel Hayes, yet understood that the quiet trainee nurse standing among the hostages was the most dangerous variable in the room. Within minutes, the entire hospital knew something was wrong. Security announcements echoed through hallways. Restricted access protocols activated. Elevators were temporarily halted. Visitors were directed into secure areas. Outside, police vehicles surrounded the building. Inside the surgical ward, fear settled over everyone trapped with Victor Kane. The treatment area contained 9 people. 3 patients. 4 medical staff members. Victor Kane. And Emily Carter. Kane positioned himself near the main entrance where he could watch both the hostages and the corridor beyond the glass doors. His handgun remained visible. His injured side continued bleeding. The combination made him increasingly unstable. Marcus Reed established communication from outside the ward. Using an intercom system, he spoke calmly. "Victor, my name is Marcus Reed. Nobody wants anyone hurt." Kane laughed bitterly. "That's not my problem anymore. People inside need medical care. I need medical care." Marcus paused. "Then let's work together." For a moment, Kane said nothing. Then he disconnected the intercom. The room became quiet again. Emily observed him carefully. His movements revealed exhaustion. His posture revealed pain. Most importantly, his decisions revealed fear. Fear often created opportunities. But it also created danger. A frightened person with a weapon could become unpredictable without warning. Across the room, one of the elderly patients began shaking. His name was Harold Benson, 78 years old, recovering from abdominal surgery. The stress was affecting him. Emily noticed immediately. She slowly approached. Kane pointed the gun toward her. "Where are you going?" "The patient needs help." "Stay where you are." Harold's breathing worsened. Emily remained calm. "If he deteriorates, you'll have a medical emergency." Kane stared at her. Several tense seconds passed. Then he lowered the weapon slightly. "Make it quick." Emily nodded once. Nothing more. She walked to Harold's bedside, checked his pulse, adjusted his oxygen flow, spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. Slow breaths. Harold followed her instructions. Gradually, his condition stabilized. Rachel Morgan watched from nearby. Something about Emily's calmness felt unusual. Everyone else looked terrified. Emily looked focused. Not fearless. Just focused. Like someone concentrating on a difficult task. When she returned to her position, Kane studied her briefly. Then looked away. Another mistake. The people around Emily still saw a trainee. Kane saw a trainee too. Nobody realized how much she was learning every second. Outside the ward, tactical teams began arriving. Police commanders established a perimeter. Negotiators reviewed information. Marcus Reed provided floor plans and patient records. Yet the situation remained difficult. The hostages were trapped in a section of the hospital designed to protect patients, not resolve armed standoffs. Back inside, tension increased when one of the patients began crying uncontrollably. A middle-aged woman named Linda Foster had recently undergone surgery. She was frightened and exhausted. "I want to go home," she whispered. Kane closed his eyes. The sound clearly irritated him. Emily noticed. So did Rachel. If Kane lost emotional control, everyone would be at greater risk. Emily slowly approached Linda. Look at me. The woman did. Focus on my voice. Linda nodded weakly. One breath at a time. The crying gradually subsided. Again, the room became calmer. Again, Kane's stress level dropped slightly. Emily never drew attention to what she was doing. She simply kept reducing problems before they became crises. Hours earlier, nobody had trusted her with difficult responsibilities. Now she was quietly holding part of the room together. At midnight, rain continued hammering against the hospital windows. The night felt endless. Kane's injury was worsening rapidly. His shirt was soaked with blood. Even without examining him, Emily could see signs of significant blood loss. Dizziness, sweating, delayed reactions. He needed treatment. Soon. And eventually he would realize it. That realization could either save lives or endanger them. Everything depended on how he responded. Suddenly, Kane stumbled. Only slightly. But everyone saw it. His hand immediately grabbed a nearby counter for balance. Embarrassment flashed across his face. Then anger. Dangerous anger. He pointed the gun toward the room. Nobody moved. Nobody did. The tension became almost unbearable. Emily remained motionless. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. Because she understood something the others did not. Victor Kane was losing control of the situation. Not because police were outside. Not because negotiations were working. Because his own body was beginning to fail him. And when that happened, the most dangerous phase of the crisis would begin. For now, Emily stayed quiet. She stayed patient. And she continued preparing for whatever came next. By 12:30 in the morning, exhaustion had settled over the ward. Nobody had slept. Nobody had eaten properly. The fear was no longer sharp and immediate. It had become something heavier. A constant pressure hanging over every conversation and every movement. Victor Kane remained near the entrance. His condition continued to deteriorate. The wound along his side had bled far more than he realized. Each time he stood, he needed a moment to steady himself. Each time he spoke, his breathing became slightly more strained. Emily Carter noticed every change. Not because she was searching for weakness. Because understanding a patient was second nature to her. And whether Kane deserved sympathy or not, he was still a patient. That mindset helped her remain objective. While others focused on the weapon in his hand, Emily focused on the person holding it. She quietly observed patterns. How often he shifted weight. Which direction he favored when turning. How quickly he reacted to sounds. How long he could remain standing before discomfort appeared. Information mattered. Information saved lives. Across the room, Dr. Daniel Hayes sat beside a supply cabinet reviewing possible treatment options. He still viewed Emily as an inexperienced trainee. Yet something about the past few hours was beginning to challenge that assumption. Every patient Emily touched became calmer. Every problem she approached seemed to shrink rather than grow. Most importantly, she never appeared overwhelmed. Daniel finally approached her. "How are you staying so calm?" Emily glanced toward Kane. "People need us focused." "That's not what I asked." For a moment, she considered her answer. Then she simply said, "Panic spreads." Daniel looked at her. The response sounded simple. But it felt practiced. As though she had learned it somewhere important. Before he could ask another question, Kane called out, "You." The gun pointed toward Emily. Several people immediately stiffened. Emily remained still. "What do you need?" she asked. Kane pressed a hand against his injured side. "How bad is it?" The room became silent. Everyone understood the significance of the question. For the first time, Kane was acknowledging his condition. Emily approached carefully after receiving a reluctant nod from him. She stopped several feet away. Close enough to observe. Far enough to remain safe. "You're losing blood." "I know that." "You also have signs of infection beginning." His expression darkened. "You can tell that from here?" "Yes." The answer seemed to unsettle him. Not because she was wrong. Because she was right. Emily continued calmly. If the wound isn't treated, your condition will become harder to control. Kane looked away. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then he ordered her back. The conversation ended. But an important change had occurred. He had started trusting her judgment. Only slightly. Only enough to ask a question. Yet in a crisis, small shifts mattered. Rachel Morgan noticed it too. Later, while Kane was distracted by negotiations outside, Rachel quietly leaned toward Emily. "Where did you learn to handle people like this?" Emily looked at her. "I've worked with difficult patients before." Rachel almost laughed. There was clearly more to the answer. But Emily offered nothing further. The hours passed slowly. Emily spent much of that time helping patients remain stable, checking vital signs, managing pain, preventing panic, supporting exhausted staff. The work appeared ordinary, but beneath the surface she was doing something else. She was building a complete picture of the room. Every chair, every cabinet, every medical cart, every possible obstacle, every possible risk. Not because she planned to attack anyone, because preparation reduced mistakes. And mistakes cost lives. At approximately 1 o'clock, Kane suddenly became dizzy while moving across the room. His balance failed for a moment. The handgun lowered instinctively. Then he recovered. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds. Nobody reacted. Except Emily. She noticed exactly how long it took him to recover. Exactly how much pain crossed his face. Exactly how dangerous his condition had become. The situation was changing. Not dramatically. Gradually. Like pressure building inside a sealed container. Soon something would give. The only question was when. Outside the ward, negotiators continued working. Inside, Emily continued watching. Waiting. Assessing. Preparing. Still wearing the same trainee badge. Still speaking softly. Still treated like the least experienced person in the room. And with every passing minute, fewer people believed that was actually true. Shortly after 1 o'clock, the situation inside the ward became more complicated. Until then, fear had been the primary problem. Now medical reality began creating new dangers. Harold Benson, the elderly surgical patient Emily had helped earlier, showed signs of deterioration. His heart rate increased. His blood pressure dropped. The stress of the hostage situation was affecting his recovery. Dr. Daniel Hayes noticed immediately. He needs additional treatment. Victor Kane tightened his grip on the handgun. No one is leaving. If we wait too long, Daniel replied, he could crash. Kane looked uncertain. For the first time, he seemed trapped between his fear and common sense. Emily watched carefully. Every decision mattered now. If Harold's condition worsened, panic could spread through the room. If panic spread, Kane might react unpredictably. The entire crisis could spiral out of control. Emily moved beside Harold's bed. She checked his vital signs. The numbers confirmed her concern. He needed help. Soon. Kane noticed her expression. How bad? Emily answered honestly. He needs treatment. The fugitive looked frustrated. Everyone keeps telling me what they need. His voice carried genuine exhaustion. Hours of pain, fear, and blood loss were wearing him down. The weapon remained dangerous. The man holding it was becoming weaker. Outside the ward, negotiators requested another update. Marcus Reed relayed information through the intercom. Victor, we can move a patient safely. No. Someone could die. No. The answer came faster this time. Less controlled. More emotional. Marcus exchanged concerned looks with police commanders outside. Time was becoming the enemy. Inside, Rachel Morgan quietly approached Emily. What happens if Harold gets worse? Emily kept her voice low. Then we'll have multiple emergencies instead of one. Rachel looked toward Kane. So what do we do? Emily considered the question. Then she answered. We keep people calm. Simple. Practical. Focused on what could actually be controlled. For the next hour, that became her mission. She spoke with frightened patience, helped exhausted staff members, reduced tension wherever she could. Nobody announced her leadership. Nobody formally followed her. Yet people increasingly looked toward her when problems appeared. Even Dr. Hayes began asking her opinion. The change happened naturally, because competence attracts trust. At around 2 o'clock, another complication emerged. Linda Foster's blood sugar levels began dropping. The stress and disrupted treatment schedule were affecting her condition. Emily caught the problem early. She needs glucose. Daniel nodded. Agreed. Fortunately, supplies were available. The issue was obtaining permission. Everything now depended on Kane's approval. Emily approached him once more. His face looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Sweat covered his forehead. He was clearly struggling. Linda needs treatment. Kane closed his eyes briefly. Every request sounded like another burden, another decision, another responsibility. Finally, he nodded. Do it. Emily immediately administered the treatment. The problem was solved before it became critical. Yet the incident reinforced an uncomfortable truth. The ward was slowly becoming impossible to manage. Medical needs were accumulating. Fatigue was increasing. Resources were limited. And Victor Kane was becoming less capable of rational decisions. Around 2:30, Emily noticed something else. His hands were shaking. Slightly. Almost invisibly. But they were shaking. The injury was taking more from him than blood. It was taking judgment. She understood what that meant. A dangerous person was becoming an unstable person. That was worse. Much worse. Rachel sat beside her during a brief quiet moment. I don't understand you. Emily looked over. What do you mean? You haven't complained once. Emily smiled faintly. There isn't much point. Rachel studied her. Most people trapped in a hostage situation would be angry, afraid, frustrated. Emily appeared determined instead, as if she had already accepted reality and was simply working through it. The conversation ended when Kane suddenly stumbled again. This time everyone saw it. He nearly fell. The room froze. For one brief second, the gun pointed harmlessly toward the floor. Then he recovered and raised it again. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. But something had changed. The illusion of control was beginning to crack. Victor Kane knew it. Emily knew it. And somewhere beyond the locked doors, Marcus Reed likely knew it too. The crisis had entered a new phase. Waiting was becoming dangerous. Soon, someone would have to make a difficult choice. And when that moment arrived, the quiet trainee nurse would be standing directly at the center of it. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Victor Kane could barely hide the severity of his condition. The wound in his side had become a serious problem. His movements were slower. His reactions were delayed. Even standing required effort. Everyone inside the ward could see it. No one understood it better than Emily Carter. She had spent hours observing him. Not as a threat. As a patient. And now that patient was approaching a dangerous point. Kane sat heavily against a counter and pressed a trembling hand against his injury. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked directly at Emily. I need help. The words surprised everyone. Even him. A few hours earlier he had been issuing orders. Now he was asking. Emily walked forward slowly. Rachel immediately grabbed her arm. Don't. Emily looked at her. If he collapses, everything becomes worse. Rachel wanted to argue. Instead, she let go. Kane watched the exchange. For the first time that night, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Not aggression. Not anger. Uncertainty. Emily stopped several feet away. I need to examine the wound. You'll stay where I can see you. Fine. Daniel Hayes looked concerned. This is risky. Emily answered quietly. So is doing nothing. Kane finally nodded. Medical supplies were brought forward. The room remained silent. Everyone understood that the next few minutes mattered. Emily carefully cleaned the wound. The injury was serious but survivable. More importantly, It explained much of Kane's behavior. Pain, blood loss, exhaustion, fear. The combination had pushed him into desperation. As she worked, Kane spoke unexpectedly. "They said I wouldn't make it out." Emily remained focused. "Who?" "The police." His voice sounded distant, as if he were replaying old memories. Emily said nothing. People often talked when they believed someone was genuinely listening. After a moment, Kane continued. "I never planned for any of this. No one does." The answer was simple. Without judgment. Without sympathy. Just truth. Kane looked at her. "You don't seem afraid of me." Emily finished securing a dressing. "I'm careful around you." The response lingered in the room. Even Daniel noticed it. Careful. Not afraid. A subtle difference. A meaningful one. When the treatment was complete, Kane looked noticeably more stable. The immediate medical danger had decreased. But the larger crisis remained. If anything, it had become more complicated. Because now Kane trusted Emily more than anyone else inside the ward. And trust created opportunity. It also created responsibility. As Emily gathered supplies, she noticed something important. Kane had begun lowering his guard around her. Not completely, but enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to seek advice. Enough to listen. That realization brought a difficult choice. She could continue protecting herself. Or she could use that trust to protect everyone else. The second option carried risk. Significant risk. If Kane sensed manipulation, the situation could explode. Emily understood that better than anyone. Yet when she looked around the room, she saw frightened patients. Exhausted nurses. A doctor struggling to hold everything together. And she made her decision. From that point forward, she stayed closer to Kane than anyone else. Not because she wanted to. Because somebody had to. Hours passed. The conversations became shorter. The silence became heavier. Outside, negotiators continued working. Inside, Emily quietly carried the burden of keeping the situation stable. No one announced her sacrifice. No one praised her courage. Most people probably didn't even recognize what she was doing. But Rachel noticed. Daniel noticed. And somewhere deep inside, even Victor Kane noticed. The trainee nurse had become the one person standing between panic and control. The one person everyone depended on, whether they realized it or not. As dawn slowly approached, Emily understood something else. The crisis was nearing its end, one way or another. And when that final moment arrived, there would be no time for hesitation. A little after 4 in the morning, the ward had become eerily quiet. The storm outside was beginning to weaken. Inside, exhaustion affected everyone. Patients drifted in and out of sleep. Staff members fought to remain alert. Even Victor Kane looked drained. The crisis had stretched far longer than anyone expected. And that was exactly what made the next development so dangerous. It began with Harold Benson. The elderly patient suddenly gasped for air. His monitor alarm erupted across the room. Everyone looked up. Daniel Hayes moved first. His heart rhythm is changing. The situation instantly became critical. Harold's condition had deteriorated faster than expected. Medical intervention could not wait. Kane stood abruptly. Confusion crossed his face. "What is happening?" Daniel ignored him and focused on the patient. The monitor continued sounding. The sharp alarm filled every corner of the ward. Fear spread immediately. Linda Foster began crying. Another patient called for help. The room's fragile stability started breaking apart. Emily saw it happening. Every problem was arriving at once. A medical emergency. Panicked patients. An exhausted fugitive. An overloaded doctor. The situation was seconds away from spiraling beyond control. Harold needed treatment immediately. But Kane's attention was divided. His injury. The alarm. The hostages. The police outside. Everything was competing for space inside his mind. That was when Emily recognized something. Not an opportunity. A window. Small. Temporary. And possibly the last one they would get. She moved toward Harold's bed. Daniel joined her. Together they began stabilizing the patient. Kane tried to watch both them and the room. The effort clearly overwhelmed him. His reactions became slower. His decisions less certain. Emily remained focused on the patient while quietly observing everything else. The handgun. The distance. The obstacles. The timing. No panic. No rush. Just calculation. Years of discipline hidden beneath a trainee badge. Harold's condition worsened again. Daniel requested additional equipment. Rachel moved to help. Several people were now moving throughout the room simultaneously. The environment Kane had controlled for hours was becoming impossible for him to manage. Emily saw the realization forming behind his eyes. He was losing control. Not because someone was taking it from him. Because reality was. And reality could not be threatened with a weapon. As another alarm sounded, Kane instinctively turned toward the noise. Just for a second. 1 second. Emily acted. Not violently. Not dramatically. Simply decisively. She moved between Kane and a frightened patient who had started standing from her bed. The action appeared completely natural. A nurse protecting a patient. Nothing more. But the movement forced Kane to shift position. Forced him to adjust his balance. Forced him to react while exhausted and injured. The mistake was small. Yet it mattered. His weakened leg slipped slightly. His injured side struck a counter. Pain flashed across his face. The handgun lowered. Only briefly. But long enough. Emily immediately stepped forward. Her hand secured the weapon. A precise movement. Controlled. Efficient. No struggle. No dramatic fight. Just timing. Perfect timing. The room froze. Even Kane seemed shocked. The weapon was suddenly gone. Several seconds passed in complete silence. Then Emily backed away. Gun pointed safely toward the floor. Finger nowhere near the trigger. Calm. Disciplined. Controlled. The exact opposite of panic. Kane looked at her. For the first time all night, he truly saw her. Not as a trainee. Not as a hostage. As something else entirely. Something he could not quite understand. Outside the ward, officers were already moving. The situation had changed. And everyone inside knew it. The long night was finally reaching its conclusion. The seconds after the weapon left Victor Kane's hand felt unreal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room seemed frozen between danger and relief. Emily Carter stood calmly with the handgun secured and pointed safely away from everyone. Her breathing remained steady. Her posture never changed. As if she had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times. Victor Kane stared at her in disbelief. Not because she had taken the weapon. Because of how she had done it. No panic. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Just precision. Outside the ward, officers immediately received confirmation that the weapon had been secured. The response was instant. Security doors opened. Police tactical personnel entered the corridor. Within moments, trained officers moved into the room and took Victor Kane into custody without resistance. The fugitive looked exhausted. Almost relieved. The fight had left him hours earlier. Now there was only surrender. As officers escorted him away, Kane glanced back one final time. His eyes found Emily. "You knew what you were doing." It was not a question. Emily said nothing. Victor Kane gave a small nod. Then disappeared into the corridor. The crisis was over. Or at least everyone thought it was. Patients began crying with relief. Staff members embraced each other. Several nurses sat down simply because their legs could no longer support them. Rachel Morgan covered her face and laughed nervously. The kind of laugh that appears after surviving something terrible. Dr. Daniel Hayes looked toward Emily. "What exactly are you?" Emily offered the same calm smile she always did. "A trainee nurse." Daniel almost argued. Then stopped. Because everyone in the room knew that answer was incomplete. Minutes later, senior police officials entered the ward. Statements were taken. Witnesses were interviewed. Medical teams resumed patient care. The atmosphere slowly shifted from crisis to recovery. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit arrived with 2 federal officers. He moved through the room with quiet confidence. Not rushing. Not drawing attention. Yet people instinctively stepped aside for him. Marcus Reed greeted him immediately. The respect between them was obvious. The man reviewed reports for several moments. Then his eyes settled on Emily. Everything changed. He walked directly toward her. Rachel and Daniel exchanged confused looks. The federal officer stopped in front of Emily. For a second neither spoke. Then the man nodded respectfully. "Miss Carter." Emily returned the nod. "Sir." That single exchange caught everyone's attention. The officer glanced briefly around the room, as though deciding how much to say. Finally he spoke. "Your judgment tonight prevented a very bad outcome." The room became silent. Not because of the compliment. Because of the tone. It was not the tone of a stranger. It sounded like professional recognition. Recognition between people who understood each other's capabilities. Daniel noticed immediately. So did Marcus. Rachel looked completely confused. The federal officer continued. "We appreciate your discretion." Emily answered simply. "I'm here as a nurse." The man almost smiled. "Of course." Again, nobody understood the conversation. Yet everyone sensed something important hidden beneath it. The officer extended his hand. Emily shook it. A brief gesture. Nothing dramatic. But the respect visible in the man's expression told its own story. After he left, Rachel approached immediately. "Who was that?" "A federal supervisor." "Supervisor of what?" Emily hesitated, then smiled faintly. "An old program." That answer created even more questions. But she offered nothing else. Over the next hour, fragments of information slowly surfaced. Marcus Reed eventually learned that before entering nursing school, Emily had served in a specialized federal tactical medical unit that supported high-risk operations. Nothing glamorous. Nothing public. Most people had never heard of it. The training focused on crisis response, emergency medicine, decision-making under pressure, and protecting lives during dangerous incidents. Suddenly everything made sense. Her calmness. Her observations. Her discipline. The way she had read Victor Kane's behavior. The way she had waited for exactly the right moment. Not because she was extraordinary. Because she had spent years preparing for situations where mistakes cost lives. Rachel sat quietly for several seconds after learning the truth. Finally she laughed softly. "We trusted you with inventory." Emily smiled. "Inventory is important." The answer made Rachel shake her head. Yet it also perfectly explained who Emily Carter really was. A person who never needed recognition. A person who never announced her abilities. A person who simply did the work that needed to be done. And as dawn began appearing beyond the hospital windows, everyone around her finally understood how badly they had underestimated the trainee nurse who had stopped an armed fugitive without warning. The sun was rising when St. Gabriel Medical Center finally returned to normal. Rain clouds drifted away from the city. Morning light filtered through the hospital windows. The long night was over. Patients were safe. The hostages were free. Victor Kane was in custody. For most people inside the hospital, the events of the night would remain unforgettable. For Emily Carter, there was still work to do. While police officers completed reports and administrators discussed procedures, Emily was helping patients prepare for breakfast. Checking vital signs. Updating charts. Refilling water cups. The same responsibilities she had performed before the crisis began. Nothing about her behavior suggested she had become the center of attention. In fact, she seemed determined to avoid it. Rachel Morgan found her adjusting an 4-line in Harold Benson's room. The elderly patient looked far healthier than he had several hours earlier. When he saw Emily, he smiled. "I heard you saved everybody." Emily shook her head. "A lot of people helped." Harold laughed softly. "That's not what everyone is saying." Emily finished her work and checked the monitor. Focus on recovering. The patient smiled again. Yes, ma'am. Outside the room, Rachel was waiting. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Rachel finally said what she had been thinking for hours. You never told anyone. Emily understood immediately. About my previous work? Rachel nodded. Why not? The answer came without hesitation. Because it wasn't relevant. Rachel stared at her. Most people would have mentioned it. Most people would have used it to earn respect. Emily never had. That fact impressed Rachel more than anything else. A short time later, Dr. Daniel Hayes joined them. The physician looked exhausted. But he also looked different. The dismissive attitude he once showed toward Emily had completely disappeared. I owe you an apology. Emily looked surprised. For what? Daniel folded his arms. I thought I knew exactly who you were. Emily smiled. And now I realize I didn't. For a moment all three stood quietly together. Then Daniel laughed. You know, when this started, I wouldn't have trusted you to run a trauma room alone. And now? Rachel asked. Daniel looked toward Emily. Now I'd trust her with mine. It was the highest compliment he could give. Emily accepted it with the same calm expression she accepted everything else. No pride. No celebration. Just appreciation. As the morning continued, hospital administrators arrived to review the incident. News crews gathered outside. Reporters requested interviews. Several staff members were praised publicly for their actions. Emily declined every request. When asked to speak, she redirected attention toward the medical teams and security personnel. Marcus Reed eventually found her near the nurses' station. He carried a folder containing reports from the night. You know they're going to talk about this for years. Emily smiled faintly. They'll find something new to talk about next week. Marcus laughed. You really don't like attention? No. Good. He extended a hand. Thank you. Emily shook it. The gratitude was genuine. Not because she had taken a weapon away from a fugitive. Because she had protected people. That was the part Marcus respected most. Near the end of the shift, the federal officer from earlier briefly returned. He approached Emily while she completed paperwork. I've been asked to pass along recognition. Emily looked up. Thank you. That's all. She smiled. That's all. The officer nodded. The response clearly did not surprise him. Before leaving, he paused. The program would take you back immediately. Emily looked through the window toward the patient rooms. Several people needed medication. Others needed monitoring. Someone was calling for a nurse. Her answer came quietly. I know. The officer followed her gaze. Then he understood. For Emily Carter, service had never been about uniforms, titles, or specialized assignments. It had always been about people. The officer nodded respectfully and walked away. That was the last conversation they had. A few minutes later, Emily answered another call light and disappeared into the ward. No audience followed her. No ceremony waited. No applause echoed through the hospital. Just another patient needing help. And that was exactly how she preferred it. As morning fully arrived over St. Gabriel Medical Center, the stories of the night began spreading through hallways and break rooms. People spoke about the armed fugitive, the hostage crisis, the long hours of uncertainty. But most of all, they spoke about the quiet trainee nurse. The one nobody noticed. The one everyone underestimated. The one who never introduced herself as anything special. Yet when the worst moment arrived, she had stepped forward without warning and protected everyone around her. Meanwhile, Emily Carter simply continued her shift. Exactly as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The end.